Hi, friends. Host Eric here, host Talking with Famous People, and I'm here with Boris, self-identified ENTP. And the reason I wanted to talk to him is because he was saying some interesting things in the room last night that I didn't really feel like I got a chance to develop the topics with him at all. And so I wanted to ask him a couple of questions about his thoughts on things in general. And I want to start with his thoughts on Jordan Peterson, which is where the conversation started last night, kind of. So you were saying, Boris, that in general you find Jordan Peterson, quote, intellectually honest. And I've been thinking about that term a lot all day, actually, because it's not a term I normally use. I've heard it used before, but it struck me as an interesting term. Can you tell me what you mean by that in general and how related to Jordan Peterson?
This will be the first time I'm actually defining it, I would say, in a official context. It's more of a feeling I had when I talk to somebody, like whether they're willing to sort of play with me and try and find the truth, how fixed they are in their viewpoints, I guess.
Okay.
If they have their own truths that they're not willing to sort of change and share, or if we're having a conversation, we're putting everything on the table. It's, I guess, would be some kind of working definition of it.
Okay. So if you're having an intellectually honest conversation, then the person is detached from the position statements that may emerge in the conversation, such that they're willing to concede the wrongness of certain points, provided the other party does the argumentational work.
Something like that, yeah. Like they're, I guess, open-mindedness, just the willingness to at all change your mind in the slightest. Like
Okay. So that's an
be
interesting.
halfway somewhat.
That's interesting. It's not the definition I. That's not how I thought you meant it exactly, but or it certainly isn't how I would have defined the term if asked to sort of guess what you would define it as. I would have said something like that he's he's not trying to obfuscate and or muddy. In other words, that he's not engaged in adversarial rhetoric is one possible angle on it. Now, you could potentially argue a given position for a while, and you could even argue it hard without actually being attached to it. So the other issue is it's kind of an interesting question as to uh, whether the display correlates with actual attachment or detachment. Have you watched a lot of Jordan Peterson stuff?
A decent amount, yes, I would say. He has a lot of lectures on YouTube. I have not watched all of them, but I would guess I would probably guess like 100 hours at least of his content over the 2 years now.
Um. So, what sort of ideas have you taken from his videos that you found particularly of use, or which ones have you taken exception with? Just give me a little bit of a survey of your response to those watching those videos.
Well, the things, a lot of these lectures are just incredibly interesting deconstructions of various topics. Even like he has a whole series of lectures on like different Disney movies and how he sees the characters as archetypes and how those relate to or not to like Christian mythology or just mythology in general, story making. There's just very fascinating ideas that I really haven't considered before, and the Jungian archetypes, he basically introduced me to that concept, which is a very incredibly interesting one, and I think it's correct as far as storytelling goes. Like he made, I think, a comparison to Harry Potter and how Harry Potter basically took all these different Jungian archetypes, and that's why it's such a beloved book, because it tapped into that primal human, the hero myth, all the different sort of things that appear throughout human history and stories. That'd be one example of something incredibly interesting I heard from him.
Okay, interesting. So, basically, you find it a rewarding consumer experience because it's talking about ideas, and it's concurrently. Well, I mean, what is it? Do you think that the key element there is that it links to a single frame that functions as an overarching frame? In his instance, probably mythos or Christianity or whatever you want to call the overarching frame, or is it for some other reason?
Probably that. Yeah, it sort of illuminates a part that I haven't really, like before I watched those lectures, I didn't think about that at all, especially like mythology and specifically Christian mythology or even story making and telling. It's not something I've been particularly interested in or research. I didn't come up on it, I guess you could say. And then suddenly I watched one of his videos and, oh my God, this is incredibly interesting actually. And I kept watching. Because it sort of provided a framework for something I didn't think about and didn't have a framework for before.
I see. So, the other thing you said about him last night was that you thought his position on Christianity, in contrast to most of the other things you've heard from him, seemed intellectually dishonest. That's to say, he was really arguing from his own attachment rather than from any kind of disinterested calculus.
Exactly. It goes back to that. You mentioned like muddying the waters or obfuscating. I got a very strong feeling of that from really any discussion, any kind of discussion where he, even like a simple question interviewer would ask him, where he asked, do you believe in God? Like, it is a very direct question and people don't like answering that directly, but at the same time, I appreciate people who just say yes or no and then expand upon it, because that feels the most intellectually honest to me. It's a very yes or no question if I'm blunt about it. And then you can go, well, actually, the God of the gaps, yeah, sure, I have the deistic point of view that God is actually in the gaps, and that's fine as far as I can tell. Or some more of a structured belief system, or maybe it's just pure fundamentalist belief.
Okay, so
it's more honest at least.
So in response to that last night, I said, well, I self-identify in at least some capacities as as somebody who utilizes faith in God. So do you think my position is intellectually dishonest? Because if you were to ask me if I believed in God, I would say I don't affirm statements of God's existence. In other words, those aren't position statements I want to argue in favor of. Do you think that's being intellectually dishonest as well?
I would probably say so, yeah, a little bit, because it comes down to that whole agnostic atheist question. Those are two very different things.
I mean, I think, see, from my perspective, the most honest answer I can possibly give, intellectually or personally, is that the answer that I give you, which is, you're asking me if I believe in God. And it would be dishonest for me to say that I have a clear conception of what that means going in. But I also don't want to play, you have to define belief first. I don't want to set the burden on you. To me, that would be intellectually dishonest. Instead, what I say is, I will answer your question in a way that makes sense to me, which is to say, I'm not affirming statements about God's existence. I could if asked to. It's not a position I prefer arguing over the negation necessarily, although I typically do, because most intellectual people that I'm interested in arguing with at all are going to be taking a different kind of position. So it may be that I tend to be AF more, but I don't prefer to argue the side. In contrast, I would say I am more likely to say that I believe in libertarianism, where I feel emotionally attached to news that says, like, they passed this other stupid law. It'll make me upset, I don't have an emotional attachment to either side in a religious divide. So I'm not when atheists talk shit about God, I don't feel like, hey. And when God people are around talking about God, I don't feel like, shut up with your God stuff.
I guess I get that. Yeah, I've been thinking about, actually, it occurred to me why that question is as important to me as it is. I think that's basically to do with how willing you are to believe something on no evidence. That's what I'm actually trying to get at, I think. It just occurred to me that that's probably why it's so important to me, because if I ask you if you believe in God, you say yes, and then you expand upon that to include a lot of things that there is no scientific evidence for, then I will think less of you, not as a human being, just as an intellectual counterpart in a conversation. Like,
Okay.
I will find your reasoning flawed in some way, like corrupted, I guess you could say.
Okay. I get that totally. That, you know, if I demonstrate before you a willingness to abuse some third party, even though I've never abused you, it's going to make you think less of me, right? Now, obviously, this isn't a moral issue in the way that is, but the same notion: if you abuse discourse on this issue, then you really can't be trusted to use discourse well consistently, and you need to use it well most when it's least comfortable to do so. So I get what you're saying there, but my point is, the best way to sidestep the intellectual honesty issue entirely and the belief issue entirely and provide you a meaningful answer to the question without trying to squirrel out of it or trying to put the burden on you is for me to say, I don't think that God is something that one believes in. I don't think God is the type of object of analysis that one ought to believe in. I think that instead of being an object of analysis, it's part of an interactive behavioral protocol that produces whatever comes back from it, or whatever meaning you make, that from whatever sources you choose to make it from, it doesn't matter. That meaning that's been conferred by magical thinking into a meaning pouch is one set of meanings that one could look at, but it's not a set of meanings that can ever be used to justify anything to other people. Okay, so there's a big difference between me deciding within myself that I want to do this because I once had a dream I saw a unicorn over there. I'm not going to be able to tell other people they should do this because I once had a dream there's a unicorn over there if I expect them to take me seriously as a reason provider, right? But it doesn't change the fact that I might have my own magical thinking reasons for things, but not expect anybody else to buy any of it, right? I think it's the thing that offends you is when people expect other people to buy their bullshit.
Pretty much, yeah. I'm very glad to hear that. Like, that's more or less what I'm looking for when I ask that question, is whether you base any of your actions. I think I would still prefer you to not even have the other bit, because it feels to me like there's always a temptation then to, like, you're just tired or you're done arguing and you just go to that thing. Like, I just feel that way.
It's the other way around, though. I have to work to remember to do that shit, or to care, or to try, or to actually incorporate it. And I generally don't ever anymore. When I incorporated it most is when I needed it most, and when I determined it has some utility, which is when I had to quit drinking. And the thing is, I could not logically justify to myself in any way, shape, or form the sort of claims I was being expected to swallow in AA. Things like, I'm powerless over alcohol. I'm clearly, objectively, definitively not powerless over it. Was any sort of logical calculus of the question, and any reasonable definition of the word powerless, I'm clearly not powerless over alcohol. So if I'm being told I need to believe this if I'm going to quit drinking, and I don't believe it, then okay, fine, I don't believe it. I'll reframe it in some way. I'll say, well, overall, over the long haul, I've demonstrated, not that I'm powerless necessarily, but that I exercise my power in ways contraindicated to staying not drunk. In other words, that I want that shit too much, I do too much, I'm impulsive about it. The drug itself inhibits my ability to make good decisions about the drug, which is an awful effect of a drug to have. So for all these factors combined, I can functionally call it powerless. We'll note it out. We'll tag it with that, with an asterisk, Fine. Whatever. That was a component. But then they also asked me to have religious faith elements, like have faith in a higher power, stuff like that. Well, I couldn't do that, but what I could do was execute behaviors I was instructed to do as a self-humbling experience. Eric, this is the natural consequence of you being a stupid fucking drunk. Now you have to pray. You don't have to believe anything, Eric. You just have to engage in the behavior. I know how to talk words to a pretend thing in the sky in my head. I can do that. I can engage in the behavior. I can be honest about it and say, yes, I did it, or no, I didn't really do it, or whatever. For me, that was an odd experience because that's when I first realized I could engage in a behavior that appears to be predicated on belief without believing anything in any way that could be established by anybody else. So you can only prove that I believe something if I affirm it.
Okay, the pieces are somewhat starting to fall into place for me now. But you're almost describing like meditation or any kind of those spiritual practices that can completely be detached from the question, is there a God or do you believe? So I don't really see how they're related, especially. I can see how they're related in your case, but just in general, when I ask somebody a question, do you believe in God, whether they're meditating and therefore feeling denuminous, it seems unrelated to me. I have meditated as well, and it is incredibly relaxing.
I've prayed, though, specifically, like this in your head. You go, Dear God in heaven, I would like to communicate with you the following thoughts, or, sometimes gratitude, sometimes, please give me the patience to not punch that fucker in the face next time I see him, or something like that, Not that I'm likely to punch anybody in the face ever. I'm not physical in that regard, but it's that behavior that, it's like everybody knows what prayer is supposed to sound like because you've seen it in the movies or whatever. I was raised by atheists. My parents are both atheists, and they hate Christians.
Mine are not.
Oh, okay. So my atheistic, Christian-hating parents didn't leave a lot of room for me to play pretend time, It was like, that's bullshit, But Grandma says, well, because Grandma's fucking wrong. Okay, Dad, all right, fine. Whatever.
That sounds like good parenting. If I think back on it, I'm doing this less and less, but I think back to my childhood when I was like 8 and we had religious education in school. We don't have separation of church and state where I'm from. But our RE teacher would take us to church, and it's a beautiful place. And I, at that age, felt odd. I felt denuminous, whatever the spirituality of it. And I still remember those moments. But I can't really make a link in my mind between that and anything having to do with anything supernatural.
What did you say? A luminous moment? Is that what you said?
Numinous. It's a...
Numinous. What does that mean?
I think it means sort of spiritually meaningful, I guess. That is the feeling you get. Oh, the feeling I described.
I gotta Google it. That's an important word. If it does mean that, it's a good, useful word. Numinous. Having a strong religious spiritual quality indicating and suggesting the presence of a divinity. Numinous. Wow. This isn't even your native language. I have a massive fucking vocabulary word. And you just taught me a really cool vocabulary word.
I heard it from Sam Harris. I can't take the credit.
Oh, well, I like it. Numinous.
It is, and he is a fairly spiritual person through meditation, and he's completely disconnected that from any kind of religious belief, and I admire that a lot. I don't think I have that in my life. I've sort of tried doing it. I don't know, maybe I'm still too cynical.
It's a matter of where you come from, right? For you, religious belief is the thing you're breaking away from. For me, I have to break away from atheism, you know? So I have no attachment in the way that people who were raised religious do to religion. Either way. I don't feel resentful towards it. I just think like, oh, that's that crazy thing that people do that we don't do ever. I mean, it's not like, you know, I knew my parents had strong feelings about it mostly because my dad would rant to the newspaper like, God damn, Christians are putting up things in the park again. Yeah. You know. So that's how I knew about it. But it's not like I got told. It's not like, see, atheism's not like a religion. It's not like I got dragged to atheism school every Sunday to learn to hate God, right?
Exactly.
So
I mean, that is a very common argument, having to explain to people that it's not a belief. It's the opposite. It's very hard to sort of make people aware
well,
of a life without belief. I don't know how else to explain it. I don't.
Here's the thing: it intrigues me a lot because there's a time in my life when I really wanted to have a bumper sticker or something that said, "Belief is the laughter of Satan," or something like that. You know, because I was so anti-belief. But since that time period in my life, I gradually had handed to me this thing that the only way things that matter really happen is by caring a lot, and you have to sort of genuinely care. And while it's nice to have detachment or disinterested calculi at your disposal when contexts are appropriate for that, there has to be a clear division made between living your personal life as an individual who needs to have an interested calculus, who needs to know what is best for him and what he really wants, and who needs to know that it anything goes. You know, this is my one life, so I could exclude all prayer from my life and say I'm not going to engage in that behavior, because to do so is to imply anyway that you have position statements about the existence of God, which seems to be a hot button topic, and so I'm just not going to do that at all. I have no reason to. I can't come up with any logical explanation as to why I ought to engage in this behavior. It doesn't adequately withstand any scrutiny as an argument because the terms are all undefined. And even if you don't undefine the terms, God definitionally is beyond word containment, and thus indications of anything specific about him are going to be misleading. And the only best proofs in favor are like an ontological proof or my grand observer proof maybe. But all in all, really, the resolution skews an egg, as they say in debate, right? You're fighting an uphill battle if you're fighting the aft side. So why would I want to fight that battle? It's not relevant. It's not a collective truth. In other words, one utilizes faith in one's own life in one's own particularist way as an expression of one's animal self, in the same way that I masturbate sometimes, not because it's logical, but because I want to, and that's okay, and I don't have to justify it to anything. It doesn't mean I believe in the ultimate glory of masturbation or something. It doesn't mean that I think that everybody should masturbate all the time. It just means that I feel like doing that occasionally, and it feels good to me. That's good enough, right? So I think that's really the approach people ought to take towards faith, is don't exclude it entirely, because you could, but then you'd have one fewer frame, and you not have that pleasantly, totally out of place frame right next to all your logical friends. It's cool. It makes you cooler. Don't you want to be cool, Boris?
I would love to be, and I've thought about it. Like, I do envy people who have that spiritual element to their life. The more detached it is from actual, irrational stuff, the better. So Sam Harris would be a perfect example of somebody who has a very strong spiritual element to his life. He achieved it through like meditation retreats for 3 years and acid and all kinds. He had to sort of cheat his way into it, but not really, because Buddhists have been doing that for thousands of years. So
those are just demons tempting him to go into the occult. That's all that is. It's demonology and the occult. That's Satan is going to drag him straight down into a lake of fire for his so-called spirituality. That's called, false gods. Okay.
That is also true. You know those Buddhist terrorists when they go into the middle of the street and set themselves on fire?
They're the worst. How many dark spots have been left on roadways? How hard is that to get out? I mean, those roads, they didn't pave themselves. Our government was nice enough to put those there. Not so many people are going to leave a big black oily spot there. You're going to burn yourself in the ocean where you won't catch on fire.
Yeah, when the ashes can be automatically spread out.
Or you could just be doused immediately once you catch on fire, which would be nice. It would save your life that way. Still dramatic, though. Big puff of steam.
It will be indeed.
Okay, well, this seems like a good stopping spot for this video. Thank you, Boris, for chatting with me about that stuff. And for you at home, if you don't remember, if you haven't seen, this is the first video you've ever seen or something, I do have a typing service, and I also have a book for sale. My book for sale is a book of exciting tables called Exciting Tables and Words About Human Personality. It's a series of one-offs that are standalone documents, a whole bunch of them, all put in one book. It's a fun book to read. And the other thing is, the typing service, if you want to talk to me for an hour, one-on-one session, I can type you or talk to you about your life or whatever you want to talk about. You can get that at the store for $60, TwFPcollectibles.com. And don't forget to eat plenty of cheese. Thanks for watching.